Hello, everybody, and welcome to the May 23rd Trips and Traps. Andy Serling, joined by Richard Migliori. We have 4 turf races to go over from last week, kind of a variety of different races.
Well, always a lot to talk about with turf races, and we'll get right to it.
Yeah, let's get to work here, and we'll start out with a race. I believe this is from May 15th on Thursday, the 4th race, and this is a race that is just a classic meltdown, and it's not that we see any specific trips, but we want to talk about how the race develops. We want to talk about this horse, WATERWAY, who actually will finish 4th. We want to talk about this horse, COUNTKNICKERBOCKER, who finishes a very good 6th, and we want to talk about the 2 horses in back, and it seems to us that this is a race where you probably want horses that were close to the pace when they come back, not the horses that may have appeared to have run better.
Well, this was a pretty strong pace. When they go 22 flat, 45-1, they're running right along. And particularly when you get caught in a position like WATERWAY, and even more so COUNTKNICKERBOCKER, caught wide into the teeth of that pace.
A tough situation for the rider, Manny Franco, on WATERWAY, because he thought he was in like a stalking spot, but then COUNTKNICKERBOCKER joins him on the outside, and I think he did a decent job of trying to extract himself from it. COUNTKNICKERBOCKER, he was very aggressive. Perhaps it's because he was off a bit of a layoff in this race and he was a little bit fresh. I think some are going to think the other horses had wider trips and ran well. We think it's the speeds that ran well.
Yeah, I think the speeds ran well. And if you really watch the horses that do come finishing down the middle of the track, and there's COUNTKNICKERBOCKER.
There's Sun Worshipper, and the 4-horse SLIMSHADY. 7 horses actually angling off the rail. Sorry, Richie.
Right, but when he angles out, he actually makes the corner, SLIMSHADY, first. You can see he makes the turn, and now he's going to angle out to the clear. You're not losing ground doing that. You've already made as much of the turn as you possibly could before you come out in the clear. And we would be remiss not to mention the tremendous ride by Mike Luzzi on the eventual captain, Darvik, who actually gets through and saves ground the entire trip.
He did everything absolutely perfectly. He not only was able to rate his mount well, but he saved all the ground. He got through in the stretch. It was a terrific ride by him. Sun Worshipper took advantage of the pace. As in a way to SLIMSHADY, as you pointed out, he saved the ground. To me, I think WATERWAY ran pretty well first time in the turf. COUNTKNICKERBOCKER's a horse that I've had a love affair with because he finds trips all the time. I thought he ran very well, though.
He ran well. I mean, arguably he was the best horse, and certainly should have been second in that blanket photo, and you wind up 6th, and that illustrates just how difficult it is on the turf. If you don't get the right trip, you could wind up 6th when maybe you could have won the race.
Yeah, and it also illustrates why these races are good betting races to bet on in general, because going forward, if the same field stacked up, you could have a very, very different result depending on how the race played out.
Yeah, absolutely. Any one of the 4 finishers that finished behind the winner with a different trip can get the money.
Yeah, no, an interesting race and a classic meltdown. Also a race to think about when we talk about a later race in the show and we talk about saving ground and angling out and getting into the clear. But for now, we will turn our attention to a race on Saturday's card. And this was a stake race with a 5-horse field. And both Richie and I thought it was an interesting trip by Green Mask, who was much the best horse.
Yeah, Green Mask, I love everything Irad Ortiz is doing down the backstretch. He extricates himself from that position where he would have been locked into one option. He gets back out of this fray of the first 3, and then he can go anywhere he wants. He can go inside, he can go outside, he can follow. I thought for sure as much horse as he had, when he eventually eases back out of this situation, he was probably going to opt to ease to the clear when he made his run. As we're going to see, he does something much different.
Right. You do wonder if he was under instructions that we've talked about before to wait and make a final burst here, because Rajiv Mirage is riding the 1, Cabo Cat, behind him, and he'll see an opportunity coming up, Richie, to put Irad and Green Mask in a little bit of a jackpot, and it almost really works.
Yeah, and watching here, I know what's going through Rajiv's head. He's watching him. He's going, wow, if he keeps tipping in behind these horses, I'm going to pull out and make my move, have momentum, and then limit his options. And that's exactly what he does. Right here, he says, okay, I had enough of this. I'm gonna try to take it to you and get a tactical advantage.
No, it really was a very good tactical ride by him, and he got a little unlucky, and the horse inside of him had no horse and backed out so quickly that it opened a hole momentarily, but Green Mask either doesn't want to go through the hole, or the hole kind of closes up as the 5 drifts.
Well, you know, I think he's looking at it. He knows this horse has momentum. I'm going to put myself in between these 2 horses. The gray horse was drifting through the stretch. If I do that, I'm really putting myself in a compromising position. Let me take back a little bit more, come to the outside. You can do that when you have a lot of horse. If he didn't have that much horse, he might not have been able to do exactly what he did.
And if it was a dirt race, Richie?
Oh, if it was a dirt race, game over. Yeah. Horses can accelerate on turf differently, and they can stop and start differently on turf. On dirt, the race would have been over.
Yeah, because Cabo Cat had that momentum, and it would have propelled him so far in front. I don't think the other horse could have gotten his legs or her legs, and this is the case under her. I thought Green Mask ran very, very well in this race. I wonder how far she wants to go, but she's a horse with talent.
Yeah, I wonder how far she wants to go, too, because you can see she pulls. She gets in the bridle. Horses that pull tend to not stay as far as maybe you would expect them to, as easy as they're going. I'm also curious, maybe she's a filly with a short run. Maybe that was the instructions, because it just seemed a little bit of an unorthodox route to victory.
I agree, but, for a horse that may have a short run, she certainly was able to overcome some trouble in there and still have her burst at the end. A good sign for her going forward.
Absolutely.
We will turn our attention now to a couple races, back-to-back races on Sunday's card, and the first one is a non-winners of one New York bred race. And we're going to talk about G-Note, and a horse that got a little unlucky.
Yeah, G-Note, you can see here, is kind of easing back out of that first fray. And a horse that you can see Junior Alvarado's kind of having a niggle at to kind of keep her attention a little bit. And it's really interesting, and we're going to be able to illustrate that in a little bit when we show the head-on, how when a horse is in behind horses, they'll be off the bridle. It's like a moving roadblock in front of them. So they're not seeing daylight. When she gets flushed out of that pocket trip or that cover trip, that's when she kind of jumps on the bridle and winds up probably getting involved a little too early.
Yeah, and it feels a little bit like the rider on Take Off Your Hat, Luis Saez. He got a little bit worried he was going to get jammed up in there, and he's going to force his way out, and he ends up forcing out G-Note. And both those horses, G-Note moves, they both sort of take each other into the race too soon.
Yeah, and I can kind of understand it. He's looking in front of him. He's got a 97-to-1 shot and a 23-to-1 shot in front of him. He's got horse. He says, gosh, I don't want to get caught up behind these guys, but it was a little early to push out of the pocket. And when G-Note gets in the clear, jumps on the bridle, and then his horse kind of gets competitive with that horse, and they make this kind of elongated move.
We saw a similar situation actually in a race here on Thursday that I think I'd like to talk about on Trips and Traps next week. And it's interesting, the winner and favorite in this race, Summer Solo, he was the horse that could have kept them bottled up in the backstretches. We'll see in the head-on. I wonder if Joel Rosario rode him was happy to let those two run off.
It's interesting. Sometimes as a rider, your tendency is to move early to keep guys jammed up, and in essence, what you're doing is using your horse. I think Joel just said, I'm riding my horse. I'm not comfortable with moving into the teeth. I'm going to settle. And obviously, it was the right move.
It was the right move. But G-Note was a little unlucky here. I'm not sure that G-Note would have won this race, but I think under different circumstances, it would have been much closer. And I don't think it was Junior Alvarado's fault.
No, not at all. And when we watch this head-on coming up, you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. You can circle where he is now. He's trying to stay in behind the gray horse. So the gray horse is a few lengths in front of him. He's going to get flushed out a little bit here, but you're going to see him make a concerted effort to get back in behind that horse, because this is how you get horses switched off the bridle, and then they'll have more to finish with. You see now he tips back in behind him. Keep your eye on the horse in the green inside him. He's going to kind of edge him out into the clear, and then both horses are going to get going too soon.
Do you feel sometimes when you were riding horses in turf races and you had a bunch pack and you've got a horse, you know you've got a lot of horse, but you also know it might be a horse that doesn't have a big burst. Now he's out in the clear. Sorry, Richie.
Right.
That if you hold them up in that hole for a long time, it's almost like you create kind of a cannonball where you've got a horse that's getting more and more ready to run, and if you can time it perfectly and get the room, you can get the absolute most out of your run.
Well, absolutely. They get wound up. It's almost like they're crying to run, and the more wound up they get, when that comes, it's like they pop. It's like that release. And with turf races, it's that turn of foot, that acceleration that wins those races. The more you save, the more they'll accelerate.
And this is really an opposite situation. I think that Junior Alvarado wanted to try to save his horse, but when he got out in the clear and was forced out, the opposite effect happened.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You watch it, you can see both minds working. I know what Luis Saez is thinking. He said, gosh, these horses aren't live cover. I don't want to get in a position where I'm jammed in here. I have an opportunity. Ultimately, it wound up costing both of them.
Yeah, no, it did. It didn't work out for them. And G-Note, and even Take Off Your Hat, are horses that will run better next time out if they get a more comfortable trip. We are going to look at a maiden race, the 5th race from Sunday the 18th next. And this was a race where trips were key, and I want horses that had wide trips. The winner had a perfect trip, and we're going to talk a little bit about this horse, Sheldon. We're going to talk about the 10, who's a bit of a long shot, a wide trip, but also the 12 outside of him, and the 12 horse's strong stipulation. This is the horse that I want coming back, because this horse was never able to save any ground or get any cover, as you were just talking about.
Well, and particularly on the inner turf, it's so much harder to be wide on the inner, especially if you're caught wide on both turns. I've always said it's very important to save ground on at least one of the turns. If you lose ground the first turn, save all the ground the second turn. If you know you've got a horse that needs to be clear, save every inch on the first turn. He never got that opportunity.
No, neither one did, especially the 10. Now, listen, to be fair, this guy is blue, finished 11th in here, but I think he showed a little bit more run than the 11th place finish suggests. We're talking about a 40-to-1 shot. And just give this horse a second look next time it runs and see if you can move him a little forward. Strong stipulation, a horse that was victimized by his post, especially, as you said, on these interturf races where time after time after time, it's the horses that save ground that are effective in these races. The 5-horse Sheldon, who finishes second, saves ground, but there's a decision made in coming the stretch that may have cost him the victory.
Yeah, I was a little surprised. I thought Junior Alvarado was giving this horse a terrific ride. He saved a lot of ground. He worked his way into position. And at the head of the lane, when we get a little closer, you're going to see he has to wait to come around the gray horse, and he starts to angle out.
It's interesting, just point out, that's the gray horse outside of him right now, and Junior's inside of him right now.
Right, he's inside of him now, and Johnny's got outside position on him, and getting first run. You could see at this point, Junior has horse. You know, you're looking at everybody in front of you, and you're trying to make decisions now where I'm going to head. He ultimately decides I'm going to have to angle outside the gray horse, which looked like the right move. At that point, I think he had to commit to that idea, and we're going to see that he kind of changes his mind midstream, and he'll head back inside.
Well, you see the 10's moved up 4 wide, the 12's behind in a decent spot at this point, and there is Sheldon we're talking about. And it's interesting because when you shift the gears and you go in between horses, not only can you counter some traffic, as he does, you also lose some of your momentum.
Yeah, you see, he's already kind of heading out, and he was actually almost to the point where he was completely outside the gray horse, and maybe he didn't realize how far the gray horse may or may not come, but at that point, now you're in the stretch. You're not going to lose any more ground, so now he's got to duck back in, and now he's fighting his way between horses, and he does get hampered a little bit here. And ultimately, when you just get beat a neck, you have to wonder if maybe he'd continued on that outside path, it might have been easier, and he would have got up.
Yeah, hindsight's 20/20, and that's obviously the case here. And he did a very good job of finding a hole and getting through it. But as you pointed out, that temporary steady and that mild loss of momentum, we're talking about a horse that lost by that much. And if you go around and get in the clear, as we talked about with a horse earlier in the first race, it is the easiest way to get your horse free running.
Yeah, I think there's a stage where you have to say, all right, I'm inside, I'm going to pick my way, and this is the hand I'm dealt, and I'm going to play it. Or, you know what, I've got an opportunity to angle out, I'm going to angle out. You can't hedge at that point. You have to make that decision and live or die by it.
Yeah, no, it's a tough situation. You think of where he came from, and he's got to settle himself and the horse and think, okay, I got horse, but I'm behind everybody here. I've got to find my trip.
Yeah, I think the key to that, too, is never looking past the ones right in front of you. It overwhelms. I knew it overwhelmed me when I try to look through the field. Just stay with what's right in front of me. How am I going to get through this and then deal with the next step later?
Not as easy as it looks watching on TV. And also, we can always use your help as well. Trips and traps at NYRAInc.com.